Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the latest Zoom ramble. I'm downstairs in the room of dreams and music at the moment, and this is going to be the first ramble recorded down here. Tonight, I'm going to talk about Shetland Part 2, my second visit to the islands of Shetland when I was a young man. Just to recap, I had been in Liverpool. I had been trained as a carpenter and joiner. And part of that training is to make your own toolbox for all the lovely tools that they give you and train you how to use all those hand skills and hand tools. And they also tell you, for good measure, when you get a job, make sure you tell them that you're a trainee, that you've done this training, and don't try and pass yourself off as an experienced carpenter. It'll be the worse for you. Now, I hitched up all the way from Liverpool back to Shetland with my toolbox and toolkit, which were heavy as anything. I did it. I got there. I got a job as a carpenter. I didn't say I've done my training, blah, blah, blah. I said I was a carpenter. And on the job, the other carpenters there objected to this trainee carpenter coming along and getting paid the same as them. And I got fired almost right away. So I had this rite of passage thing about getting fired early in your career. So that was a bit of a blow. And at that time in Hillswick, in the northern part of the main island of Shetland, places to live were very few and far between. Not a lot of people lived there anyway, and quite a few people did want to live up there. So there was a caravan park, and a local guy, Addy Mowat, he had started this caravan park. It was kind of incongruous having a bunch of caravans on this hillside facing the sea, and mostly it was sea weather that came in there. But you could walk to the pub from there, which was the main thing, the main activity in the village. Um, and that's what we did. I had a friend from Liverpool who had a caravan on that caravan park, and there was a cupboard at the end of his caravan. And I lived in his cupboard for a while, for which I am truly grateful. To this day, I'm truly grateful. And that guy, as life would have it, became my brother-in-law. So I have this enormous reservoir of gratitude to my brother-in-law who afforded me his cupboard in the caravan as a place to stay for a while, till in fact a caravan opened up and I had a caravan of my own on that caravan site. So there I was living in the caravan site in North Shetland. It's just kind of a very incongruous place to be, thing to do. But there weren't a lot of choices about, really. You just got on with living there. There were other guys, people living on the caravan site. You hang out with them. You became friends. Um, I had some money because I'd been in Shetland working in the oil work. So when I got back to Shetland, I had money in the bank. With that money, I went down to Lowick, the main town in Shetland, and I went into the motorbike shop and I bought the biggest motorbike that I was legally allowed to drive, which was a 250, a Honda 250. Now, a Honda 250, that's only a titchy thing in the world of motorbikes, which get enormously powerful and huge. But a 250 Honda, a new one, excuse me, that was a powerful beast. It was a lovely beast. And the shop took me outside of town. They pulled the bike on a little trailer they had, took the bike off the trailer, and put me on the bike and said goodbye. So I had, excuse me, I had to learn how to ride that bike there and then. The bike had crash bars on it. So if it went on its side, it was held off the ground by, excuse me, the crash bars. Well, I learned to ride that bike And actually, I would recommend it to anybody who was interested in riding a motorbike and was sick of all the crossings and the traffic lights and all the things you've got to stop and start all the time anywhere you might want to drive in the UK. Well, go to Shetland because there ain't no places to stop up in Shetland. Occasionally, there's a bit of a crossroad, and you can see before you get there if there's anybody there that you might need to stop for. In Shetland, you could just go, and it was fantastic. And in fact, you didn't even have to stay on the road. You could go off road and drive over the peaty bogs down to the beach, and I would do that. Amazing! You could drive with a caravan. You could just take your bike and end up on the gorgeous beach. There's nobody on that beach, hardly anyone on that beach. And one of the reasons I went to Shetland from Liverpool, because I was trying to learn to play the trumpet. Nobody was teaching me. I was trying to teach myself how to play the trumpet. Of course, that's a very painful experience for anybody who has to listen to the dying elephant of Ellie trying to play his trumpet. So I got banished to Shetland. Go and play your trumpet up there, mate. That's a good idea. So I have my trumpet. I could put it on the back of the motorbike, go down the beach. I got my trumpet out on the beach, and I could just play. I was free. I had these gorgeous 21-year-old lungs. I could breathe. I could play. I could belt it out. And playing on the beach in the row, the sound carried and carried, and then it echoed back. So you kind of had this gorgeous sound effects going on. The whole bay, everything in the bay. The seals will pop their heads up and go, "What's all that racket about?" And they come in, they were curious, and it was a wonderful, absolutely fantastic experience. I'd be out there for hours. I dream about Miles Davis and being good enough to play with him or any of the other people I love to listen to, Carlos Santana or anybody, the drummers. And because I was learning the trumpet, I was listening to the trumpeters. And I love listening to Louis Armstrong, Clifford Brown, all the great trumpeters from the 20th century, I suppose. So it wasn't so bad living the life on the caravan. We kept each other company. We did crafty things. I made my friend Neil a beautiful backgammon and chess set, all glued together pieces of wood, really gorgeous. Um, my friend Neil, he was a university graduate from Dundee. He was a smart cookie. I liked him. I liked his girlfriend. His girlfriend became the wife of the man who was going to be my brother-in-law one day. It's a small world. Anyway, one day a guy came looking to hire workers on the island, which was very unusual because they don't hire people on the island. He came as working for the company called Patterson and Candy, and we called them the Candymen because he hired me and Neil, and me and Neil we worked together. I was a I was not a graduate. I was a graduate from the School of Life, but Neil was a graduate. We were both intelligent human beings. We were well read. We could think. We were good. We had abilities. Um, and we were hired by this guy, the Candyman, because the Candyman was going to he was going to create this water treatment plant for the great oil refinery at Sullom Voe. Obviously, there were all these guys there on the island. They all needed water. They didn't have enough water on the island. They were building a water treatment plant. Made perfect sense. And a water treatment plant is a series of mechanical devices that clean and purify the water from one end to the other. And to build the plant, you had these drawings, these designs of how to put all the kit together by a huge Meccano set. I liked doing Meccano when I was a kid. I never did it perfectly. I could never make things work like they were supposed to work, but I really enjoyed putting things together and having a go. And then as a kid, you get really heavy marbles and destroy everything afterwards. That was the best bit. But we were there in real life. There was me and Neil, and we were bright, and we've been tasked with putting together the innards of this water treatment plant. And all the gear came in bags, it was all labeled and numbered. All you had to do was just follow it. It wasn't painting by numbers, it was water treatment plant by numbers. It was all really straightforward. You'd assemble everything, and then everything will be set in concrete. Oh, set in concrete. That sounds serious. Anyway, Neil and I, we were young, we were idealistic, we wanted to do a good job. We wanted to show how bright we were, how capable we were, and how our Candyman boss had done the right thing in trusting us to do this work for him. But unfortunately, that same company, Patterson and Candy, that had this old guy turn up. And this old guy was like a supervisor guy. He was there to tell the younger guys to work harder. And he would arrive on a balcony way above us in the water treatment plant and look down on us. And we were down in the bowels putting the kit together. And then he would rubbish us. This was his way of encouraging people and getting them to work harder, is to tell them how rubbish they were and how rubbish their work was. And this went on day after day. And this old boy, he had a hip flask and he was drunk. He was actually drunk all the time and abusing us. Now, this wore us down day after day. And I have this kind of sense of shame talking about this now because I wish that I'd been an older, mature person who could just ignore all this nonsense going on. But me and Neil, we were getting worn down day after day. And a day came when Neil and I, we didn't say anything. We just looked into each other's eyes. We gave each other this long look. And in that look, we decided we were going to screw everything up. We were going to make sure this water treatment plant never worked and nobody was ever going to make it work because all the innards would be wrong and set in concrete. And that's what we did. This was our pleasure at the time. This was our guilty deep secret. We were doing it all wrong and pretending it was all right. This was our revenge on the old boy of letting that company unleash that old boy on us, which was a big mistake. Now I feel sorry for our boss, our Candyman. He was a decent guy. He'd hired us, he paid us well. It was his last job. He was going to retire. He had a pig farm somewhere in Yorkshire. He was going to breed rare pigs. Sounded great to us. Sounded like a lovely life. But I have to tell you that I'm a dedicated Guardian reader. I love reading the Guardian. They have the best writers, and they're writing about the best, most interesting stories. And one day, I was reading the Guardian cover to cover, and there was this tiny little story about this water treatment plant in Shetland. And even though they kept testing it and testing it and testing it, it never worked. And everybody was really cross and bothered because it cost a fortune to make this plant. And there it was, and they couldn't make it work. Oh, and I wasn't too sure about the statutes of limitations, and I wasn't going to tell anybody anything that we deliberately sabotaged the thing. In Shetland, there was a lot of industrial sabotage that I was either did or was involved in at the time, and it was part of our pleasure of not only being well paid, but really, really messing things up as well. I read about a new airport runway that I had been involved in. It wasn't my fault that it didn't work properly and had to be rebuilt, but I was there, I was part of it. And if you'd asked me at the time, would this runway be any good? I would have been able to help and say no. Oh God, it was so rough. That was another thing I read about that had to be redone. You know, it'd be nice in life if you did your work and you were part of things that were really good and all that. But that didn't happen. But anything, anyway, other interesting things did happen in Shetland. If you remember, I told you the caravan site was set up by this guy called Addy Mowat. He, he was an enterprising guy. He created this caravan site, and there was a separation really between the Shetlanders, the people who lived there, the islanders, and the incomers like me who come up because it was an interesting place. There was work and money, or the hippies were there because it was a beautiful place when the sun was out. But Addy invited me one day to come and help. And they were building a replica of a Viking longboat for their annual Up Heliar festival in January. And they don't just have that festival in Lowick. Every little village has its own little festival. So I got involved with the local festival, and it was a real privilege. Andy would come and pick me up. He'd bring me down to the village hall where they were building the replica boat. In the school, all the kids were painting the shields for it that go on the side, and it wasn't really much of a proper boat. It just looked like it might be a proper boat. It actually would have an inboard motor on the inside so they could poodle about. Um, all the guys working on that boat, of course, it was all guys. They all had a hip flask, and they would all be friendly and offer me to take from their hip flask. So it was a very boozy evening. It wasn't using great skills or anything helping build their boat. It was a very enjoyable experience. And one day, I came out of the local pub because the local pub was a really gorgeous old pub, nice beer, nice being in there. We were employed on the caravan park, so we would have long boozy lunches in there. Of course, you would. That would be like one of the main events of the day, going down to the pub, having too much to drink in the lunchtime, and then staggering back to the caravan park and sleeping off. Well, one day, it was quite a nice day as well. Quite a nice day in Shetland would be an unusual experience in general when it wasn't raining and blowing. I came out the pub. I'd had a couple of pints at lunchtime, which is quite strong. I came out the pub, and all the guys were climbing into the boat. And I said, Oi, that's my boat too. So they invited me to come with them in the boat, only because I staggered out of the pub and saw them. They never kind of was going to include me in their little test drive of the boat. But I got in the boat and we went off into the bow. The bow is the little inlet there from the sea into the land. Absolutely gorgeous, all of it. We're out in the boat. We're all like really proud we made this boat. Isn't it fantastic? So what? We're going to burn it. It's a fantastic boat. We're all we're all a bit drunk. All the guys have their flasks, and they have more of their flasks because we're going out on the sea. And as soon as you're out on the sea, it's cold. That wind is starting to bite. Anyway, we're out in the bow, and all of a sudden, our engine stops chugging, and we run out of fuel on the engine. Well, this wasn't just unfortunate. This was rather serious because the bow will lead you out into the sea, and once you're out on the sea, there's nothing there for a long, long while but more of that terrible North Sea. So we were all drunk enough for this reality to start hitting us, and we were all kind of, oh my God, what are we going to do? Well, fortunately, the wind blew us onto the side of the boat, onto the land, and we threw out one of the young boys that were in the boat so he could run off and get some fuel for us, which is what we did. But that was an unforgettable Shetland experience. It was really nice being part of making that boat and part of just being part of the village just once, not just an outsider or anything. That was lovely. In the end, uh, after working for Patterson and Candy, of course, that job did come to an end. We supposedly had done all the work. We were unemployed again, and then we got hired again, this time on Stolen Bow. And this time I found myself working as a welder's mate basically, a labourer carting the gear around for the welders on Shetland-Part for the oil storage tanks. Now, I think everybody should have this experience of working on an oil refinery that's being created, because if you really wanted to know what our world and our civilization is about, it is about fossil fuels and oil and gas, and burning cheap energy, or everything that's happened up till now. Suddenly we're at war with Russia and we don't have cheap energy. But this day was coming. Sooner or later, it was coming. Those oil storage tanks are enormous. They are the equivalent of the cathedrals that were built in the Middle Ages. They're huge, they're vast. It's a serious business making these oil tanks. These oil tanks are made up of big plates of steel that are then welded to each other. And then every weld, every part of every weld is photographed and scrutinized and analyzed, because you don't actually know which welder did what work. Everything is double checked. And if there's any doubt about the quality of that weld, they go back, they burn out the weld, and they do it again and photograph it until it's scrutinized and it passes muster. Those oil tanks, they're unbelievable. Anyway, I was out there, I was working 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. I was in my little dream. One, it was a good crack moving stuff around for the welders, because once stuff is moved around, the welders get on with it, and you have some dream time. You just wait till they need something doing next. There was a lot of that. And there was a lot of going into a dream, just having a reverie. It wasn't anything that Liz Truss could complain about, idle workers. It was just part of the job. You had to do something to keep yourself going 7 days a week, 10 hours a day. I was in my reverie. Something happened in that reverie. I wasn't just having a daydream. I was consumed with the feeling, the certainty that something was happening in those moments that was going to change my life. There was something life-changing happening. I didn't know what it was. I was just seized with the intensity of that, because I was certain. I felt it. I felt it in my being, my whole being. Anyway, the reverie passed. I came back. I was in labourer helping the welders. And then a Land Rover pulled up, and somebody came to me and said, "You have to go to the office. You have to call home, Liverpool." So I thought, oh my God, my dad has died. That's what that reverie was. I was feeling his passing. I was feeling his soul going off to heaven, or whatever it is that happens when you die and you have last communication with your kith and kin. I went to the office. I called home. I spoke to my sister, one of my sisters, my middle sister, and she tried to be clever and tell me that my dad was in hospital. It was serious. I had to come home. This was all terribly confusing now, because I'd felt him die, but was being told he hadn't died. He was just in hospital having a moment. The company sent me home. They gave me a travel warrant. They didn't have to do that. I was employed on the island. I was basically an islander to them. They didn't have to do that for me. If, would they do that for me today in 2022? Probably not. But back then, they just gave me a travel warrant. I drove myself down on my motorbike to the airport. It's a 60-mile journey. Got on the plane to Inverness, got the train to Liverpool, met my family at Lime Street train station. My dad had died. Curiously, I tried to call my mum a week before he died. because I wanted to sort something out. It was no good talking to my dad. My dad was hopeless, Mr. Magoo. You have to talk to my mum to sort anything out practical. I called up. My mum wasn't home. So I ended up having this great chat, natter, an unexpected conversation with my father. He was laughing. He was making jokes that I was going to lend him some money. Ha ha ha! How funny that was. He was amused. We had this lovely, lovely conversation, which I realized in hindsight that was the last conversation we had. I had been away from Liverpool for about 6 months, so I hadn't seen them for quite a long time. Um, when I was home, in Jewish religion, you if somebody dies, you want to bury them as quickly as you can. That's the religion. You don't hang about. You don't wait for the family to gather. You don't wait for crematorium. You don't wait for anything. You bury that person as quickly as possible, and everybody comes. And there are whole rituals uh, associated with it. And I decided when I was back home that I should move back to Liverpool from Shetland and I should support my mum. This is a completely idiotic kind of a thought because I wasn't able to support my mum. I wasn't old enough. I was very upset. I think about it now because I'm very upset now. I think I'm losing my partner, Miriam. And I haven't been so upset since my father died, which is the truth of it. So I do think about this now. Um, but the gist of it is, I packed up my life in Shetland. I sold on my bike to my best friend there. I packed everything up. I'd had enough of Shetland. The sun don't shine very often. I miss the sun. And I thought, well, I'm going to go to Israel. I'm going to go to Israel. I'm going to work as a carpenter on a kibbutz. And I went back to Liverpool and arranged through an agency to do that. But that will be another ramble, my adventures in Israel, which were many and rather amusing. But thank you for listening tonight to some of the delights of Shetland. I haven't been back, but it's always got a place in my heart, Shetland. The big thing about Shetland now is when they tested the whole of the UK for a depository for all the nuclear waste that this country produces, which is a vast, if you add in all the doctors and dentists, never mind the nuclear industry, the UK is sitting on a horrendous amount of waste that needs a depository. So they've done a geological survey, and the place to put it is in Shetland. So that is one hell of a row that nobody wants to even start. And there would be logistical task of how do you get all the waste from the mainland to the island safely. That and they've done it with the oil mostly, but of course, if they did have an oil disaster, it would just be an oil disaster. But if they had a nuclear disaster, then that would be somewhat worse. Um, However, I'm sure that could be done. And for me personally, I think this country should have a depository. Other countries have got it together. I don't think you should do anything nuclear if you don't have a depository and if you don't start thinking in terms of 100,000 years. That is the right thing to do. It's the responsible thing to do. And I'm waiting for this country to grow up and do it. It might not be in Shetland, it might be somewhere else, but it has to do it. Um, and it's a way of avoiding reality not doing it. Anyway, that's the thing about Shetland. It should be in Shetland, but nobody can face the awfulness of the row that would ensue of Britain having its rotten way with Shetland again. We should have our rotten way with Shetland again. We should do it. That would be morally, I think that would be the greater good. Of course, I'm not a Shetlander. I'm sure Shetlanders would have a completely different point of view. Fair enough. Anyway, thank you for listening tonight, and I'll see you again, I hope. Thank you.